chapter we on there? 13. And so next week we'll be on chapter. There ain't no another one, is it? So we're going to finish up Nehemiah tonight, and I'll go ahead and give you a heads up. Our next book study is going to cover three book series, and that three book series is going to be 1, 2, and 3 John. First, second, and third John. We're going to start next week. In that series. All right. So make note of that. Let's go ahead and open up in a word of prayer, and then we'll go from here and dig into the last chapter of Nehemiah. So let's pray. Father, we do come to you today and tonight, and we just thank you so much for the blessings that you pour out upon us. Father, you are absolutely the most amazing thing we could ever imagine. Father, we don't deserve a single moment of your time, but God, you bless us immensely every day. We're thankful that you do just that. God, tonight as we come to you, help us to just put aside anything, Father, that may be going on in our life, maybe going on outside of what's happening right now. And God, help us to just focus on you. Help us to focus on your word, and that, Father, as we do, you would speak to us in an amazing way. Yeah. Thank you, Father, for all the blessings, and we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. All right. So again, thank you for joining. Thank you for joining us online, those of you who have joined. And we are in the last chapter of the book of Nehemiah, and that is chapter 13. Now, chapter 13 it's really amazing. It starts in one way and tells us some things, and then it kind of goes back and talks about some of the things that's happened in the past and where they're at now. So it's kind of a recap in the last book, but in the last chapter, but it begins talking about some things that are happening at that moment. It says, "At that day they read from the book of Moses in the hearing of the people, and in it was found written that no Amorite or Moabite should ever come into the assembly of God, because they had not met the children of Israel with bread and water, but hired Balaam against them to curse them. However, our God turned the curse into a blessing." And y'all remember that they wanted Balaam to curse, and every time he would go back up, he'd come back and bless. And they would get mad because they'd say, "No, we wanted you to curse." He said, "I told you I got to do what God tells me." And he kept going up and blessing. But they would not help the children of Israel as they were moving around there and all the things that were going on. And so because of that, they were not supposed to be in the people. They were not supposed to come into the assembly of God. So first thing I want us to look there is, as it says that, no Ammonite or Moabite should ever come into the assembly of God, as the people draw near to God in worship. So here's what I want us to see. It's not saying that those people could not ever talk to the people of God. It's not saying that those people could never accept God. It's not saying that those people are complete outcasts, never to be spoken to. What it's saying is they are not to come into the solemn assembly. They're not to come into that worship. They're not to come into that part with the children of Israel unless they have turned to God. If they turn to God, then they are able to come into that. But at this point, he's saying they are not able to come into the assembly. They should not ever, because what we see is in Nehemiah 11 and 12, they became aware of God's standards, and it's the same standard that was in Deuteronomy, because Ammonites and the Moabites were not regarded as part of Israel. But we do see in Scripture where when they convert to God, when they actually leave their faith behind and they convert to God, they are accepted. It says they should never come into the assembly of God. But again, what I want us to see in that is that we understand that they're not supposed to come into the solemn assembly. They're not supposed to come into the temple. They're not supposed to come into the worship. Being an Israelite was part of God's covenant by birth, right? Okay, so they were Israelites. They were by birth. They were in relationship with God. But an Ammonite or a Moabite was not. And they, in fact, tried to curse the people of God because they were against them. And so they have not become part of the covenant, and they can't be unless they choose to. But if they choose to, here's what they have to choose. They have to choose to reject all of the other gods that they've been worshiping. They have to choose to walk away from the other way of life. So when you stop and think about it, it's no different than it is today, right? A person who is lost, a person who is not part of the family of God, a person who is not a believer, then they can come into the church. We have never said you can't come into the church, an unbeliever. In fact, we welcome you into the church. We want you to come. We want you to listen. We want you to be a part of all that. But what you can't do is you can't become a member if you've never given your life to Christ. Okay? Same type of thing here. They could come in and be with the Israelites. They could talk to them, but they couldn't come into the assembly unless they had converted. If they had completely walked away from their old way of life and swore that they believed in God and followed Him and not all these other gods, then they could be accepted into the assembly. But that's the only way. Yes? Forever. The only way. They can't do it forever unless they give their life to the Lord. There's other places in Scripture where it shows us that they can do that. I should have wrote that down for you, but I didn't do that tonight. But there are other places that says they can if they repent away from everything else that they're doing. But forever, as long as they remain, have allegiance to the other gods, and they remain following those, and remain in that walk, they cannot come into the assembly. And it's the same today. If someone refuses to accept Jesus Christ, and they refuse to become a follower of Christ, they cannot become a member of the church because they're not a believer in Jesus Christ. So we want them to come in. We want all people to come in. And we want them to hear. We want anyone to come in. They're all welcome, but to be a member, they have to be a believer in Jesus Christ. So that's the same thing that's happening here. And so when we see that, we can understand that it's a continual thing. It's something that has happened all the way back then. And the whole purpose, the whole reason that he said they couldn't be part of it at the time is because they refused. It was a curse, right? They refused to help the children of Israel, and all of that was like 1,000 years before this when all this happened. They refused to help, and so because of that, there was a curse put on them. They could have helped. There was opportunity to do it, but they didn't do it. And God had made a promise to the Jewish people from the very beginning. He said, I will bless those who bless you and curse him who curses you. And that was in Genesis.
Yes.
This was a simple fulfillment of that promise. But our God turned the curse where they tried to curse into a blessing. Every time the Balaam tried to curse, it ended up being a blessing, right? Because that's how God was doing it. He was going to bless his people. So look with me to verse 3. Verse 3 says, so it was when they had heard the law that they separated all the mixed multitude from Israel. Okay? So when they heard, they separated. Right? Now, this is interesting when you think about this. It says when they heard, they separated. It doesn't say when they heard, they decided to form a committee and talk about it and see if this was the right thing to do.
No.
It didn't say when they heard, they decided to all enter into a time of prayer and consider, is this the right thing to do? It doesn't say when they heard, they said, well, you know, we could do that, but look at all of the positives that have happened because of this, and maybe we shouldn't do that right now. It says they heard and they separated.
Yep.
Right? They heard and they separated. Why? Because they heard the word of God and they followed it. There was no excuses. There was nothing else about it. They heard the word of God and they followed it. Unfortunately, they didn't continue to do that. But they heard the word of God and they followed it. They separated all the mixed multitude out from Israel. The mixed multitude refers to those who wanted to associate with the people of Israel but didn't make a full commitment. They didn't embrace the walk with God. They didn't give their lives to God. They wanted to be with the people, but they still want to do it their way. They want to do their thing. And so because of that, they're a mixed people. Today we would say that it's a mixed multitude for those who have not received salvation in Jesus. Those who have not given their life to Jesus Christ. And they come into the church because they're seeking something. They come into the church because they feel like, oh, it's a place I can come and belong. They come into the church because they're running for public office and it looks good, whatever it is, they come into the church, but if they've never given their life to Jesus Christ, then they're part of what we call in that day the mixed multitude. It was people that were all coming together, but they weren't all believers in Jesus Christ. And so that's what was happening in that day, and it said when they heard that they needed to separate the mixed multitude, they did it. As soon as they heard it, they did it. Basically, if you were not a believer, then you were put out. Okay, you couldn't come into the assembly anymore if that was the case. You couldn't come in and be part of that solemn assembly because that was only for believers. So, let's look at verse 4 through 9. Verse 4 through 9 says, now before this, Elisha, the priest, having authority over the storm. Now remember, it says before this, right? So we're going backwards. Okay, so before this happened, we're going backwards. So before this, Elisha the priest, having authority over the storerooms of the house of our God, was allied with Tobiah. And he had prepared for him a large room, where previously they had stored the grain offerings, the frankincense, the articles, the tithes of grain, the new wine and oil, which were commanded to be given to the Levites, and the singers and the gatekeepers, and the offerings for the priest. But during all this, I was not in Jerusalem. Who is I? Nehemiah. That's who was talking here. I was not in Jerusalem. Nehemiah was not in Jerusalem. For in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, king of Babylon, I had returned to the king. Then after certain days I obtained leave from the king, and I came to Jerusalem and discovered the evil that Elijah had done for Tobiah in preparing a room for him in the courts of the house of God. And it grieved me bitterly. Therefore I threw all the household goods of Tobiah out of the room. Then I commanded them to cleanse the rooms, and I brought back in them the articles of the house of God with the grain offerings and the frankincense. So, verse 4 through 9. So here's the things that we see. First off, we see that Nehemiah was not in Jerusalem during this time. And what we know is that Nehemiah went back to his duties at the Persian court. He went back to doing for the king for about 10 to 12 years. He was gone from Jerusalem. And he went back to fulfill his duties, just like he told the king in the beginning he was going to do, right? So he went back. So sometime after the spiritual revival that we have talked about, all the things that had happened, Nehemiah left, right? Well, here's the thing. What is the real test of a revival? Anybody? Yeah, the real test of revival is what happens. What is God's work in our life? Is it going to continue? And what we're seeing here is within 10 years after all of that happened, it was all messed up again.
Wow.
Right? So, he came back to Jerusalem and discovered all the evil. When he came back, he found out that Elisha, who's the priest, right? Yeah. He's supposed to be a priest. He's one of God's people. And that he had made an agreement with Tobiah. Now, if you remember who Tobiah was, yeah. Tobiah was one that was trying to tear down the wall, throw out the Israelite. He didn't want all that to happen. He was plotting against them, doing all of those things. Yet, even though he did all those things, the priest now has made an agreement with him, not only brought him into the people, but given him a room, given him a place inside the sanctuary, given him a place to stay. He's put him in there. This is someone who was against God's people, doing everything he could, and yet the priest has brought him in and put him in. And he didn't just put him in, he didn't bring him in and just put him in a room. What kind of room did he put him in? He put him in the room where all of the offerings and things that were supposed to go to the priest were supposed to be stored. Okay, so all that was supposed to be going on, and he put him in there and threw all that stuff out. So when Nehemiah walked in, he figured out real quick what the problem was. The problem was that Elisha was blind to the fact that Tobiah was who he said he was. He was a person who was against God's people. He had allowed him to come in. He couldn't see it, but when Nehemiah got there, he saw it immediately. He knew exactly what was going on, and he knew that Tobiah was working his way in there, and he was doing all of those things. And he said, it grieved me bitterly. It grieved me bitterly. Well, it grieved him bitterly. Why? Because not only did he give him the room, but the room that he gave him were the rooms that were not, they were supposed to be used for all the things that were given to the priest and the singers and all of that, right? So it grieved him because the rooms that were occupied by a pagan man that were supposed to be used for God's work,
Yes.
but they were being occupied by a pagan man. It grieved him because Elisha, who's supposed to be a spiritual leader, he's supposed to be a priest, he's supposed to be one leading the people in the right direction. Instead, he was so blind that he allowed this pagan to come into the people and do. Well, if he was so blind that he allowed the pagan to come in, how blind was he to everything else that was going on? Was he actually paying attention to all the other things? Were there other things that were happening that he had turned a blind eye to? And this is supposed to be one of the leaders. So of course Nehemiah was upset about this, because here he is thinking everything is going in the right direction. He's gone back to perform his duties, and then he comes to check on them, and things aren't right. Things are going in a bad way. It grieved him because then Nehemiah began to wonder, okay, there was a spiritual revival that he witnessed, right? Yeah. Nehemiah was there, he watched them. The people for days, they listened to God's word without, they stood the whole time. They made decisions, they decided, we're going to follow God. They put out the mixed marriage, they did all of these things, and he saw all of that, only to come back and find out that some of this had changed. The priest who was supposed to be helping with all this is now not leading in the right direction. He's brought in a pagan. He's cast out the things that were supposed to be given and using that room for something else. He's done all these things, so it's grieving Nehemiah because he sees in this 10 to 12 years, everything that he saw, all the spiritual revival that happened, everything that was so amazing, now it's just reverted back. It's just gone back to not doing what people were supposed to be doing. So, what Nehemiah decided to do? Well, he was, super diplomatic about everything. No, he went in the room and threw his stuff out.
Cleaned it up.
He looked at that stuff, he went in there and he said, what? He started grabbing all that stuff and throwing it out. So he threw all that stuff out, just tossed it out. He ain't supposed to be in here. He threw all that stuff out. He wasn't worried about all that. This gets out of here. But he didn't just throw the stuff out. If we looked at that and said, well, he just threw all the stuff out, then what you think is he come back through a mad fit and he throwed all the stuff out, and is that the right thing to do? No. But he didn't come back and just throw a mad fit and toss everything out. He got everything out and immediately had it cleansed.
Yes.
I've heard of somebody else doing something real just like that.
Just did that.
I think his name was Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah, he went into the temple, threw the money changers out to cleanse the temple, right? That's why he threw them out, to cleanse it. That's why Nehemiah threw him out, to cleanse it and get all of that out of there, because this was a pagan man, and for all purposes he was evil. He tried everything he could to stop the Israelites from what they were trying to do, what they were called by God to do, and when he couldn't get that stopped, now he's weaseled his way in there, and he's in amongst them. So he's doing all this, Nehemiah sees it, he says, this has got to stop. This has turned into something it's not supposed to be. He threw all the stuff out, he cleansed the room, he got rid of it, and it was something that had to happen. So he not only threw the stuff out, but he ceremonially cleansed the rooms. He put the rooms back for their proper use as storerooms, for the sacred things of the temple, and he cleaned it all up, okay? So he came in and he took care of all that. But why did he have to do that? Because in the 10 to 12 years that he was gone, the people had reverted back to some of their old ways. The people had turned back to doing things that they shouldn't be doing.
Yeah.
So here's the thing. For many of us, we read that and we say, I just can't believe it. Man, they went through all that and then they just turned around and started doing it all wrong again. Well, for most of us, if we just go look in the mirror, we see the same thing. That's right. And most of us, we just go look in the mirror, we see the same thing. We've had times that we have devoted ourselves to God. We gave our life to Him. Maybe we had times where we realized we weren't doing right. We rededicated ourselves. Said we're not going to do that again. We're going to follow and do all the right things. And then somewhere or another, we look behind us and realize we have strayed away from where we were before. We have just went back into doing things the way that they didn't need to be doing. We weren't purposefully fighting every day to stay on that right track. And that's the whole point, is you have to fight. You have to fight it. Human nature, flesh nature, is to go back to doing things the old way. It's to do things that are easy. It's easier to do it not right. doing it the right way is difficult. So it's easy to not work so hard and just fall back into that lifestyle when instead you should be fighting to do the right thing. And so Nehemiah sees that. He sees all those things that have happened. It's upset him. He said, we're going to try to fix all this. So he threw all the stuff out and cleansed the room. So look with me to 10 through 14. 10 through 14, he says, I also realized that the portions for the Levites had not been given them. For each of the Levites and the singers who did the work, they had gone back to his field. So I contended with the rulers and said, why is the house of God forsaken? And I gathered them together and set them in their place. Then all Judah brought the tithes of the grain and the new wine and the oil to the storehouse. And I appointed as treasurers over the storehouse Shelemiah the priest and Zadok the scribe, and of the Levites Pedaiah, and next to them was Hanan, pardon me, son of Zakor, son of Mattaniah, for they were considered faithful, and their task was to distribute to their brethren. Remember me, O my God, concerning this, and do not wipe out my deeds that I have done for the house of my God and for its services. So, again, what do we see here? So, what we see is that Nehemiah had realized that the portions that were supposed to be given to the priests and the Levites had not been given to them. The tithe had been brought in and given, but it wasn't given to the Levites like it was supposed to. The singers and the Levites, who were supposed to have received their rations, received their tithe, received what they needed to live and to survive, they weren't getting it. So listen, if they weren't getting it, what did they do? They had to go back to work. They had to go back somewhere where they could make a living and eat and do the things they needed to do, because people weren't taking care of them. They weren't doing what needed to be done. And so when Nehemiah came back, he found out that they weren't there working and doing what they were supposed to because they had not been receiving what they needed, their support. So they had to go back to the field and go back to work so they could live and eat. So when he said they had to go back because they didn't have support, they didn't have all that, then therefore they weren't performing their service to God. They weren't singing, they weren't doing all the Levitical things that they were supposed to do. So they had gone back to the field. So he says the house of God is forsaken. Well, the lack of giving was how the house of God was forsaken. That's how it was forsaken, because it wasn't being given. It wasn't just unhelpful to the Levites and the singers. It was the way of turning their back on God, basically, right? Because they weren't doing what they were supposed to. So therefore the Levites and the singers couldn't do what they were supposed to. So in essence, they turned their back on God by not doing what they were required to do. And so therefore they were forsaking the house of the Lord. They were forsaking Him. So in that whole thing, when we look at that and all of that we see, it is not a single problem. It's a problem that compounds. Okay? So when you think about this, so God's people, right? God's people are supposed to do what God's called them to do. If one person stops doing what God's people have been called to do, then it starts to have an effect. And as soon as the one stops, then pretty soon the other one says, well, they're not doing their part, I'm not doing mine either. And the next thing you know, nobody's doing what they're supposed to, and the whole thing, God's house is forsaken. It's not being utilized like it's supposed to. It's not being done as God called us to do it.
This Tobias, he was living on the high hall.
What's that?
Tobias.
Oh yeah, Tobias he was getting everything.
He was getting all the stuff that they were bringing in.
Right.
And they got pretty tired of it.
Yeah, so Tobias was doing whatever, but the whole point is God's house has been forsaken.
Yes, it has.
It had been forsaken. They hadn't been given, they hadn't been doing. So since they weren't doing, the Levites and the singers, they were supposed to be serving God. They had things they were supposed to be doing, but they weren't able to do them. Because they had to go find food, right? They had to go work and make a living and be able to survive.
Yeah.
So they left. Well, here's what Nehemiah did. He said, I gathered them all together and set them in their place. So he got the singers and the Levites and brought them all back, and he set them in his place. And he said he set the situation, he set it right by making sure that the Levites and the singers committed to doing the work of God, and then he said it right by making sure the people committed to doing what they were supposed to by collecting, accounting, and distributing all of the tithes and the gifts that were being brought in. So he set everything back where it was supposed to be. He cleaned Tobias out, got the stuff brought back into the rooms that was there, then had the people bringing the stuff they were supposed to, giving the stuff to the Levites and the singers, who then, because they were being supported, were able to do what their service was to God. So all the people suddenly were able to do that. They were able to do the right things again. And so again, like I said before, if a believer stops doing what he needs to do to serve God, then pretty soon somebody else is going to say, well, if they're not doing it, that means I'm doing twice as much, and I'm tired, I'm not doing it. So then they stop, and the next one says, well, now I'm doing 3 times as much, and I can't handle that load, and the next thing you know, they stop. And pretty soon, the people of God are not doing what they're called to do. But how do we fix that? The people of God need to start back doing what they were called to do, right? And here's the amazing thing. It's not dependent on your neighbor. It's not dependent on anybody else. It's dependent on you. You make the commitment. You make the commitment to start doing what you're supposed to do. And the same thing tends to happen. A person commits back to doing what he's supposed to do, and somebody says, you know, he's right, I should follow that. And they commit back, and another one says, she's right, I need to follow that. And they commit back, and the next thing you know, the people are coming back, and they're starting to do what they need to do again. And so just as easily as it went down, it can come back. That's the thing that we as Christians, I think, fall into this trap of saying, well, you know, we look at the Old Testament and we see what the Israelites did, and we know every time God restored them back to where they needed to be, things would be good for a while, and they'd fall down, and it would get bad, and eventually they'd call on God, and He'd restore it again, and they'd come back. And so that's just kind of the cycle. That's how things are. So, you know, maybe in our United States of America, we're just in one of those down cycles, and we're just waiting for God to restore His people back, and, you know, we'll go from there. No. When God restored His people back, it's because they called on God, they turned back to God, and they started to follow Him again, and He restored them back to where they needed to go. For those in the church today, we've got to stop looking at everything and thinking, well, there's nothing we can do. And Nehemiah walked in, he looked at the situation, saw how bad it was. What did he do? He did something about it. And immediately started doing something about it, and the people started coming back, and the Levites and the singers came back, and the people started giving back again, and he began to turn this thing around again. That's the second time. He already came back the first time and helped rebuild the wall and did all of that. Now he's doing it again. He's helping rebuild what has fallen again. He gathered them all together, he set them in their place, and he made them begin to start doing all of the things that he needed them to do again. Now, the last part of this chapter, or getting close to the last part, 15 through 22, it's going to go back and talk about a lot of the things that happened in the past and how some of those things Nehemiah saw and some of the things that changed. So, verses 15 through 22. It says, in those days I saw people in Judah trading wine presses on the Sabbath. We know that wasn't right. Trading wine presses on the Sabbath, bringing in sheaves and loading donkeys with wine, grapes, figs, and all kinds of burdens, which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And I warned them about the day on which they were selling provisions. Men of Tyre dwelt there also, who brought in fish and all kinds of goods, and sold them on the Sabbath to the children of Judah and in Jerusalem. Then I contended with the nobles of Judah and said to them, what evil thing is this that you do by which you profane the Sabbath day? Did not our fathers do thus, and did not our God bring all this disaster on us and on this city? Yet you bring added wrath on Israel by profaning the Sabbath. So it was at the gates of Jerusalem, as it began to be dark before the Sabbath, that I commanded the gates to be shut and charged that they must not be opened till after the Sabbath. Then I posted some of my servants at the gate so that no burdens would be brought in on the Sabbath day. Now all the merchants and the sellers of all kinds of wares lodged outside Jerusalem once or twice. Then I warned them and said to them, why do you spend the night around the wall? If you do so again, I will lay hands on you. From that time on, they came no more on the Sabbath. And I commanded the Levites that they should cleanse themselves, and that they should go and guard the gates to sanctify the Sabbath day. Remember me, O my God, concerning this also, and spare me according to the greatness of your mercy. So, what do we see? Well, we see a lot of things going on that were not supposed to be going on. A lot of the very same things that were happening when Nehemiah showed up the first time. A lot of things that were going on. The Sabbath day was being totally ignored. All the things that were happening, and the people were coming in and doing all of the stuff. And he saw all these things happening. And so the problem, the very problem of all this was, there's nothing wrong with buying and selling. There's nothing wrong with doing all the things they're doing. But all of those things, by doing them on the Sabbath, they became more important than honoring God. Right? That's basically what it boiled down to. There were things that they were supposed to be spending the day honoring God, and instead they were spending the day making money. They were spending the day working. They were spending the day doing all the things except honoring God and worshiping Him. During that time in the law, there were certain things they were supposed to be doing on the Sabbath day, and they were ignoring those things, and they were working and doing things that they were not supposed to be doing on the Sabbath. So they were not honoring God. And that whole point is they had put things above God. The Sabbath had become not very important, which means that in retrospect, God was not very important. Right? They were turning their back on all of that. And so in the New Testament, we're not under the law. Right? And so we're not under the same law of the Sabbath in the sense of the old covenant and all of that, but we're still supposed to honor God more than we honor money, right? We're still supposed to honor God more than we honor money. And so we sometimes allow ourselves to do things outside of worshiping because, well, I can make a lot of money if I do that. I can get a lot done today if I do that. Or this is the only day I've got to go fishing or go hunting or whatever. I've heard people say, well, Sabbath day is a day of rest. This is the only day off I got, so I like to rest by fishing. Okay? I can go fishing, I can rest, but are you worshiping? I can worship just as good in that boat as I can worship in church. Well, I'm not going to argue that you can't. But what my question is, do you?
No.
And then the answer is, most of the time, no. That's not what they're doing out there. They're not out worshiping.
No.
You know, they're not doing that when they're out doing other things. They use it as an excuse, and they throw out a few words and say, well, because of I'm doing this. The whole point is, by what they were doing in the Old Testament, and by putting God aside to do other things even today, it all boils down to you are honoring something above God. And if you're honoring something above God, what you're actually doing is committing idolatry. Okay?
Yeah.
What's that? That's right. You're committing idolatry because you put something else above God. And that's exactly what was happening here. It happens today. There's all these things that are going on. So he says in this passage, you bring added wrath on Israel by profaning the Sabbath. See, Nehemiah knew that the sin was not only a personal issue, but it was an issue for God's people, collectively. Because if God's people were living and doing things in that way, then it was going to be an issue on God's people collectively. Why? Because what we talked about earlier. One person starts doing it, then another person starts doing it, and pretty soon everybody's doing that. That's the way it goes. And so by doing that, they were not only having personal sin, but the whole body was becoming sinful because of what they were doing. So Nehemiah said, I'm not going to stand for this. He said, if you do so again, I'll lay hands on you. Now listen, I want to be clear about something. Nehemiah wasn't talking about he was going to come over and lay hands on them like this. That's not what he meant.
No, sir.
What Nehemiah meant when he said, I'm going to lay hands on them, was he was going to lay hands on them like this, right? He was going to personally eject them from what they were doing if they continued to do what they were doing. He said, I'm going to remove you physically if you continue to do what you're doing. I'm going to get rid of it. I'm going to push you out. I'm going to lay hands on you. Now, he meant he was going to correct them.
Yeah.
Roughly. He wasn't going to gently correct them. He was going to roughly correct them.
I think he's making a promise, not a threat.
I think he was probably making both.
That's right. A
I
promise.
think he was probably making both, brother. But regardless, he let them know they better not
Yeah.
do that anymore. Now,
That ain't all.
I'm not advocating that we should be violent.
No.
We'll make that clear.
No.
Nehemiah got upset. He let them know that he was going to correct them, Perhaps he was a little more excited about it than he should have been. But regardless, the point was the people were doing the wrong thing, and Nehemiah said, I ain't standing for this.
That's right.
You're going to do the right thing.
That's right.
He was given the authority to go there and set it up and do the right stuff, and he's saying you're going to follow my lead. Right? So you're going to do what I've told you to do. All right.
Man.
23 through 31. Let's take a look at that.
He just wow.
23 through 31. In those days, I also saw Jews who had married women of Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab. And half their children spoke the language of Ashdod and could not speak the language of Judah, but spoke according to the language of one of the other people. So I contended with them and cursed them, struck some of them, and pulled out their hair.
Mercy.
And made them swear by God, saying, you shall not give your daughters as wives to their sons, nor take their daughters for your sons or yourselves. Did not Solomon, king of Israel, sin by these things? Yet among many nations there was no king like him, who was beloved of his God, and God made him king over all Israel. Nevertheless, pagan women caused even him to sin.
Yep.
Should we then hear of your doing all this great evil, transgressing against our God by marrying pagan women? And one of the sons of Joiada, the son of Elisha, the high priest, was the son-in-law of Sanballat the Horonite. Therefore I drove him from me. Remember them, O my God, because they have defiled the priesthood and the covenant of the priesthood and the Levites. Thus I cleansed them of everything pagan. I also assigned duties to the priests and the Levites, each to his service, and to bringing the wood offering and the first fruits at appointed times. Remember me, O my God, for good. So he saw all this stuff, this thing going on, and it was time for some reform, some relationship reform. And so when we see all of that, he says, I saw all these Jews that married women from all these pagan women, and they had resumed their practice of intermarrying with the pagans, which you remember earlier on, they had all turned from that. Earlier on in this very book, they had turned from that. Now they have returned, and they started doing that. And so it was a dramatic disobedience. It was something that it was directly against what God had said,
yeah.
right? So they had intermarried, they had done those things, and so Nehemiah got upset again. And so this time he said, I contended with them, cursed them, struck them, and pulled out their hair, and made them swear that they were no longer going to do that. He turned them away from it. Now listen.
He got pissed.
In the Old Testament, one of the things that we see before Jesus came, one of the things that we see throughout the Old Testament is where God tells his people how to deal with people that are not his people. And when he tells them that, and when they crossed into the Promised Land, the first thing they were supposed to do is they were supposed to go up into the land and do what?
Purge.
They were supposed to destroy everything.
Purge.
So we look at this and we say, well, Nehemiah got violent,
Yes, he did.
but he was getting rid of the pagans out of God's people.
That's right.
It was the same thing that God told the people to do when they crossed over out of into the Promised Land. It was the same thing he told them as they went throughout the Promised Land. Those pagans, those who were unbelievers, those who were trying to turn God's people away, he got rid of them.
Yeah.
He got rid of them. Now I have people that say to me, how can you say that God's a loving God when you read the Old Testament and you see where he just killed all these people? He had them destroyed. How can you say God's a loving God? That's a hard answer when you hear it put that way. That's a hard answer. But the reality is what we see and as we examine the scriptures is all of these that were pagan and were completely turned against God. We know that there had been a time when they had an opportunity to turn to God, but they did not. Okay? And so if they had an opportunity to turn to God and they turned away from God and they continued to be against God, then the only answer for them, Scripture says, those who reject me will be spent an eternity in hell, right?
That's it.
So that's exactly what God told him. I'm a jealous God.
Yes.
He said, you'll serve no other gods but me.
That's right.
And these people were not doing that, and they didn't do it. They had opportunities. They never changed. And so at that point, God executed judgment on those people.
That's right.
And in this case, and Nehemiah came in, and those pagans had intermarried, and they were trying to bring in the other religions into God's people. It needed to be purged out. How did it get purged out? Nehemiah took care of it, right? He purged it out. He had to do what he had to do. And so we see that, and even though it seems excessive to us perhaps, we have to understand this were Old Testament times. This was a time when Jesus had not yet come into the world, and when we see all of these things, it's the way that it was, okay? And so he made sure that he took care of the situation. He got rid of all of the stuff that was going on, and then he went on to tell them, listen, understand, Solomon was a great king of Israel. He was so full of wisdom. He did all of those things. He was the wisest man. And what was the one thing that caused him to have downfall?
Pagan
Pagan women.
worshiping their idols.
Pagan women. 700 wives. 300 concubines.
I don't see how he was living at all.
I knew somebody was going to say something.
I mean, you know, one and done.
So, all of that was his downfall. Nehemiah said, we're getting rid of that. We're not going to allow that to happen. We're going to do away with all of those things. We're going to do away with that. And so, that's exactly what he was working on. And so he went in to cleanse it. He said he contended with them, he cursed them, he struck them, he pulled out their hair, he made them swear. He said, this ain't going to happen. So, then at the end of all of this, after all the things that Nehemiah's done, he's come back, he's cleansed everything. You got something, Brother Don?
Yeah, he didn't do this to just Joseph on the street.
Right,
That he came up and said, that's a pagan woman, I'm going to beat the snot out of you.
right,
No.
He did this, if you look, you got the priest who had what's-his-face in the storeroom,
right,
also had his son married Sanballat, who caused more problems than Toby did.
right.
Right.
So it came down from the leadership. It's okay for him to do it. It's okay for me to do it.
That's correct.
So I think it was in the priest order that he was cleaning house, because they supposed to know better.
Right.
And they did know better, but chose not to know better.
And exactly right. The leaders are the very ones that the people were following, right? If the leaders are messing up, so are the people. And so, yeah, that's exactly right. And so he went in and he did all of that, cleaned all that out, and said, when it says he made them swear, he's talking about the ones he made swear are the priests and the leaders. That's who he's talking about. He made them swear that they're going to do the right thing. So as we go through this and we look at the conclusion down here in verse 31, the second part of verse 31, it says here, remember me, O my God, for good. Remember me for good. So Nehemiah, after all of this, at the end of everything he'd done, he knew that he did his best to try to get God's people back strong and safe. He tried to do everything to lead them to be pure, to be worshipful, to be obedient. He tried to do all of those things, yet he felt a sense of failure. Right? He felt a sense of failure. Why? Because he tried to get them to do everything, and everything seemed to be great, and he went off for a little while and came back, and it all went downhill. And so, in some ways, he felt as if he failed the people, right? He failed the people, and so he's trying to make it right. He's trying to get it back right because God had given him this task, and he had gone and done this task, and now it seems to have come undone. So he feels like a failure. He hasn't done, the task didn't stay completed. But he's saying, listen, remember me, God, remember me for good. He had this sense of failure, but he did make a solemn covenant in chapter 10 that they would not do three things, right? He made a solemn covenant that they would not have ungodly romantic relationships, and yet they were.
Yeah.
He made a covenant that they wouldn't buy and sell on the Sabbath. Now remember, the people all made this covenant together, but they did. And they made a covenant they would not fail to support the work of God with the money as he commanded. And yet He did. So in 10 to 12 years later, after everything had happened, in verse 10, in chapter 10, in chapter 13, all of those things were again the same problems that they were before. So all of these things that were going on, so Nehemiah, you know, he's saying, why is God's house being forsaken after all of these things? I don't understand after all of these things. So here's the one thing that I want us to think about to bring out of this. Rules, vows, promises, covenants, all the things that are like that are ultimately powerless to stop sin. Okay, listen, let me say that again. Rules, vows, promises, covenants, anything like that are powerless to stop sin. There's only one thing that can overcome sin, and that's the grace of God.
Amen.
That's the only thing. And all that's been done, all of the vows, everything that they've made, sin is coming in, and that's what the reason for that pattern. They follow God, they're doing good, then they fall back down here, and then God hears their call, He brings them back up. Why? Because they made vows, they made promises, they made covenants, and they're following those along, and they start to fall into sin. And once they fall into sin, they get down to the bottom, they finally get to a point where they realize, oh, I'm so messed up, and so they call on God, and God brings them back. He brings them back up, He gets them straight, and they straighten up, they make another covenant, they make another vow, they say, now we're going to do the right thing, and the next thing that happens is sin comes along again. And they fall into sin. So here's the here's the real thing. If you in this world are a fleshly human creature, sin is something that is always crouching at your door.
Amen.
Sin is always trying to tear you down. We are weak when it comes to that. We are weak when staying away from sin. And it's the reason why we have to constantly ask God to forgive us for the sins we committed, because we continually fail. We continually fall in that. That's why I say it's a fight every single day. It's a fight not to fall into that. It's a fight. And so Nehemiah and all of this, everything that he did, he kind of felt a little bit of a failure because they made all the covenants, they made all the promises, they said they were going to do these things, and then they didn't. But I want you to see this. In Romans 8, chapter 3, Paul says, for what the law could not do in that it was weak through the flesh, God did by sending His own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh. In other words, the flesh couldn't do it, but God did. And how did He overcome the flesh? He sent Jesus in the flesh, and He had the flesh crucified and buried and resurrected on the third day, and He overcame it.
Amen.
So He came and He did all of that. The Old Testament history from the very beginning all the way to the end, we see how all of this happens. We see they commit their lives, they do all the stuff, and then they sin again. But when we look at it, we see ourselves. Because we make promises to God. God, if you'll do this, I'll do that, right? God, if you'll help me here, I'll do this thing. God, I promise I'm going to serve you better than I ever have before. I haven't done it up to now, but I realize that now I'm going to do it. And we make all these promises, and we follow God, and we say we're going to do all those things, and sometimes we do it for a long time. Man, we really work hard, and we do it for a long time, and then sin begins to creep back in again. And all of a sudden, you look back and you realize, uh-oh, I tripped way back there and didn't even see that. And all of a sudden, now I got to get up and start all over again. And it happens all the time. Now, does that mean it's okay if you just, no. It means you got to fight every day. It means we got to fight every day to try to do the right things. We've got to do that. The people of Israel in Jerusalem, they were taken into exile. The reason they were taken into exile, why? Why were they taken into exile? When they went into exile for 70 years. When they taken into captivity. Why were they taken into that?
Sin.
Sin. Sin. Because of the sin, because of all of the disobedience and all the things they fell into, God said, I'm sending you into exile. You're going into captivity for 70 years. But I'm coming back for you. You're going in for 70 years, but now while you're there, understand, I'm coming back. he did come back. He appointed Ezra and Nehemiah to bring the people back into the promised land. They came back into Jerusalem. They rebuilt the temple. They rebuilt the altar. They rebuilt the wall. They rebuilt the city. It was a thriving, bustling place again. They were serving God. They recommitted their vows. They committed to God. They promised they would serve, and they did for a while. And then sin started all over again. And they started falling in the same trap. And Nehemiah came back and said, "What are you doing? Here we go again." And we started it all over again, right? So that's the process of mankind. And it's not okay for us to continue to fall into sin. But when we figure out that that's what's happening, it's time to turn back to God. It's time to turn back and say, "God, I need you to help me again. I done got in a mess again. I need the help. I've not been doing the right things, and I need to recommit to you." And then follow it. Every day, fight it. Work as hard as you can. Sin is part of this world. But praise God, if you know Him as Lord and Savior, one day you're going home. It won't be this world anymore.
How many people?
And there'll be no sin there.
How many come out of Egypt?
No sin there.
How many people come out?
Millions.
Huh?
Millions.
How many did he let go in the promised land for that much, after that 40 years in that wilderness? None.
But any of them go, yeah, he had the ones that came out. It was only Caleb and Joshua that got to go into the promised land. Not even Moses himself
The
got to
rest
go.
of them, he did the same thing. It's repeated over and over. That's like when he come off of the mountain.
Yeah.
And they was worshiping that idol.
Yeah.
And what did God do? He split that earth open and swallowed them up.
All right.
They just hard-headed people.
We are.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate you.
We are. That to be funny. They were.
That's right. Listen, that's the whole lesson for tonight, is the fact that even in everything that happened, and Ezra and Nehemiah worked so hard to turn the people back to God, they still turned away from Him again. And there was still work to be done for them to turn back. But as we see, he was turning them back again. Nehemiah was bringing them back. They were coming back where they were supposed to be. Again, they were giving the tithes and offerings. Again, the Levites and the singers were doing their thing. Again, they were starting to do the right thing again. And they were continuing to do that. So that's what we have to do, is continue to do that. So remember, next week, if you tuned in late or you didn't catch it at the beginning, next week we're going to start our new study. And we're going to be studying 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. We will study them in order, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. That's okay. We're still going to start 1st, 2nd, 3rd John.
All right.
And so we'll be in a good place to study all of that. All right. For those that joined us online tonight, thank you so much for joining us. I hope and pray that you enjoyed this study in the book of Nehemiah. And I hope you're looking forward to the study of 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. For tonight, God bless and good night.